Hello and welcome to the monthly Northwood University Alumni and Friends webinar. My name is Julia Damchek and today I will be your host. Just a few items to note before we get started. After our presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A, so hold on to your questions and type them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be moderating those questions, and we should be wrapping this up by 12:40 p.m. today, so we can all get back to work and put into practice what we're learning today. Another reminder is we are recording this webinar, and we will email out the recording along with the slides used today to everyone who is participating. Today, our topic is preventing painful presentations, how to go from ow to wow. Our presenter today prevented painful presentations in the public speaking classroom for 20 years before hopping over to the Northwood Admissions Department this past August. One of her favorite things about her job is connecting with Northwood alumni, so she's super excited to host this webinar with us today. We're happy that you're all joining us today for her webinar filled with tips, tricks, and reminders to improve our public speaking skills. Without any further ado, let me introduce our special guest speaker for the webinar, Jennifer Luzar. Some of you may remember her as Professor J. Lou. Jennifer joined Northwood in 2002 as a professor of business communications. In 21, she became Northwood's Director of Campus Admissions. She has earned her degree in Education Administration from Indiana University and a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you now, Jen. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Julie. Appreciate it. But thanks for reminding me where I've been and what I've done. It's good at my age that I get reminders. So it looks like we have 48 people attending at this point, and I'm wondering if any of those 48, which has now increased to 50, were any of you a student in my speech classroom? And if so, could you type in the chat and tell me about what year that might have been? Who you are and what year that might have been that you sat in a public speaking classroom here at Northwood to prevent painful presentations. So let's just give you about 10-15 seconds to throw that in the chat and see who we're working with here. All right, Maria. Got one. Where are the other 40? 2016, I love it. Okay, you're a newbie, Brittany. Anyone else willing to admit that you sat through preventing painful presentations and you are back for a refresher? Hello, Madeline. Jesus in the house. Hello. Oh, 3, Jesus. I think you might be one of my oldest alums. Okay, thank you for participating. I just wondered who was here and if I had any alum that were actually in this the first time around. And so here we go, preventing painful presentations. Before we go any further, I'd like everyone to think back to 1983. 1983, what did you look like in 1983? If you look on the screen, that's what I look like. Well, hopefully everybody's getting your good laugh in right now, but 1983, that was before there was any hair product for this mess, so I always looked like Ronald McDonald's wig, okay, sporting the big rainbow before it was in fashion. I was an 80s girl. So in the 80s, there were classic movies made, and I would like everyone to think back, do you know an 80s movie? And maybe you're not an 80s kid, maybe you weren't even born then, but you know the 80s movies. So if you could for me in the chat, type in your favorite 80s movie right now. 10 seconds to throw that in and see what you got. Thank you, Jesus. I think that's the picture of the year as well. Perhaps I'll have that printed on my new round of business cards. Shows that you can go from ow to sort of wow, right? So, okay, 1980s movie, that's one of your favorites. In the chat now, please. Thank you, Lori. I think the 80s were great. We're the 80s girls. How big was your hair? E.T., we got Ferris Bueller. Ferris Bueller, that's 2. Cha-ching. Okay, Maria and Julie are speaking to my heart. Although Beth, yes, 16 Candles. I must have watched that at least 30 times, especially the last 10 seconds of the movie. Okay, we got a lot of good ones coming in here. But you're speaking to my heart when you say Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And if Dan, you could flip to the next screen and play that video, we're going to look at the famous scene of Ben Stiller in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Ben.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Thank you for playing that, Dan. I appreciate that. And who would have known that growing up, that is a video clip that would. The reason that steered my teaching career is because I knew for sure I never wanted my students to look like that. So as Ben Stein played that teacher so remarkably well, he was also remarkably boring. And so what that led me to believe at an early age of 22 when I started teaching is that I needed to do it better than he did, right? You have to engage your audience. And in fact, whenever we present anything, we're basically just. And so I have some statistics for you that represent what of our communication is nonverbal, what is verbal, and what is content. And so again, in the chat, I'd just like you to take a stab at it. And 55% of communication, do you think that is verbal, nonverbal, or content? What do you think is most impressionable on your audience? So 55%, what does that number represent? Can you throw that into the chat? Do you think that's our verbal communication, our nonverbal communication, or the content of what we're saying? Got one guess there, that's good, good. Any other guesses? Okay, so we've got Julie and Deb, yes, both correct, in fact, that 55% of our communication is nonverbal. So what that means is that if we are preventing painful presentations, right, we have to get control of our bodies, right? Our face, our eyes, our hands, we have to not pace. So there's an old saying that what you do speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. So that means if your body is all out of whack, or in fact, you're doing nothing with your body, right? 55% of your communication is lost from the get-go because you are not working the nonverbal angle. Okay, so 38% of communication, what do you think that is? We've got two categories left. If 55% is nonverbal, 38%, is that going to be your verbal communication, or is that going to be your content? What do you think is next most important in a presentation or in a teacher's lesson? So what does 38% stand for? Anyone want to take a stab at that in the chat? Would that be verbal or the content? Any takers coming in here? Julie, with the first responding and the fast fingers, I love it. You're like Arnold Horseshack in the front row. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, and here we have everybody coming in unison. That is true. So we have to make sure that our voice presentations sounds enthusiastic. And if we are called to give a lesson or a presentation on anything, it is because we are an expert in that manner. So when we go in, we have to make sure that our voice sounds like we're enthusiastic or intense or passionate about the topic, right? And so then that leaves just 7% of our communication coming from the content. So when you get up to give a lesson or a presentation, right, 7% is going to be your message. The rest of it is going to be how you pitch that message. So in business, we're really into the pitch, right? So in communication, the pitch is going to be through your voice and through your nonverbal. So that is extremely important. And that is exactly what the Ferris Bueller's Day Teacher was missing, right? And as a result, his audience was in a very painful situation. So Dan, if you could flip that slide for me, please. So when I became a teacher, and yes, I have a remarkable likeness to Mrs. Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. So when I became a teacher, I had to take all of those statistics into consideration as I designed each of my lessons. And then I went into corporate training and development about 15 years ago. And every time I give a presentation, people will say, oh, you know, that presentation was so interesting, or it was so good. And I always thought, really? Because I didn't think it was that great personally, but then I realized it's because I give a presentation like I teach a class. So today what I thought I would do for you is tell you how I plan a lesson, and in so doing, tell you how I would plan a presentation, and they're basically one and the same. So I have all of these little tricks that I use that help people to stay awake and use my nonverbal and my verbal to my advantage so that I can keep my audience on the edge of their seat instead of sleeping, okay? So Mrs. Frizzle and the magic toolbox of tricks coming at you. Some of these might seem silly, but stay with me because they work. Okay, so whenever I go into a presentation or into a lesson, I always make sure that I have props. Props for me to hold and props for people to take with them. That's called a learning object. If they can take a little mirror back to their desk with them that they got in my presentation that reinforces my main point, that is a learning object that calls them back to that presentation time and time again every time they're in their workspace. So if you can take a prop in, that's very good. It also gives your hands something to do during the presentation to hold the prop, right? A lot of you are nervous with your hands, but if you have a prop, you're holding the prop. Your prop could simply be a container of water. A lot of people use their water as their prop, and that is fine. Okay, so props are a great strategy to keep your audience involved and interested. Another thing that I like to use a lot are games or interactivity, and we've done a lot of that in the chat so far with Q&A, and I like for people to be participating, and then I build other ways to get people involved and interested as we go, because you know, of course, that the average attention span for an adult right now is 5 to 10 seconds long, so every time that we can break and do something different, instead of us as the speaker blathering at them, it's going to be even better. So if you can figure out an activity or a game to go along with your topic, wonderful. Okay, next slide, Dan. All right, another thing that I love to do in a presentation is as people are arriving, I like to be having the music booming because that sets the mood and the tone. And if we can always go back to music, it's really powerful. So this past weekend, I was presenting for the open house, and every time I had them do a 30-second activity, I would put on a blip of either the Jeopardy music or an appropriate little song that would go along with it, just to, again, have that mood being reinforced constantly, right? And what is that mood? That we are here together, that we're excited about learning about this topic, right? So music can be, of course, a joiner of people. So I would say use it to your advantage before, during, and after your presentations as well. And you will see in your best speakers when you go to your best conferences, right? They're going to have that music booming as you enter the room, and then as they stop speaking, they're going to have it booming as you exit the room. That's another great thing for your nerves, right? Because if that music's going and people are coming in and kind of getting their seat, they're going to be in a better mood, and they're not going to be so foreign and stern looking, and that will help you if you have any nervousness as well. Okay, next slide, Dan. All right, now, when we say costumes in a presentation or a lesson, it doesn't mean you're dressing up for Halloween. You could be. For example, I had a high school chemistry teacher, and he taught in a different tie every day. So the entire school year, he taught in a different tie, but it wasn't just a necktie, it was a fish. Every single day, he had a different fish represented in his necktie. So he might have a little itty bitty bow tie that represented a tiny fish. He might have a really long salmon tie that he wore during salmon season that would drape to the floor. So he always had a different tie. I cannot tell you a thing I learned in high school chemistry, but I remember that man's ties day after day after day. If you want to have a hallmark way for people to remember you, say you're speaking at a conference, they might not remember anything of what you said, because remember, only 7% is content that people are going to take away. But they'll remember what you did, how you did it, what you wore, okay? So costumes are huge, and I like to say it's sort of accessorizing. So here's the deal. Now that I work in admissions, I think it is hugely important for us to be branding. Oops, go back, Dan, to costumes. So we're still there. We're still on the close. Thank you, Dan. And so here's the scoop. I think it's really important that we brand. So today I had 100 high school students here from Lakeville that I was giving a presentation to down in the Hock. And so I made sure to wear my Northwood blue and my Northwood branding, right? So costuming, sort of, branding, yes, combine it all together, they'll remember me, okay? And what you can't see and what you don't know is that these are the shoes that I'm wearing, okay? So check out the Northwood blue, right? And I've got these and I'm bopping around campus. And I had at least 10 of those 100 high school students tell me how cool these Adidas blue shoes were, okay? They're gonna remember the crazy redheaded lady in the blue shoes when they came to Northwood University, okay? So if you can have a callback of any kind just because of what you were wearing, I think that is appropriate and in fact recommended. And when I go out into corporate training, I always have a outfit that I wear, and I have bright red shoes, and I always use a red scarf that I wear. And again, it's just complete and total identity. And so think about how you can fine tune your message to what you're wearing. All right, now we go to the next slide, Dan. Okay, stories are wonderful. If you have no stories to tell, then please use pets, because everybody loves pet stories, okay? The more stories you can tell, the more powerful. And if you can make analogies to what you do on the golf course, that's even better. Those are the age-old business ways to plug any kind of idea or event. But stories, 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 and if you have slides, throw pictures in, because wasn't that picture of me in 1983 funny? I know Jesus already gave me the award for that, but I just want to call that out and say the more stories you can tell to prove your points, the better. Okay, next slide. If you can have freebies or giveaways or food at your presentations, people will love you all the more. I talked a little bit about learning objects already, but if you can always give a pen, that's great. And again, in admissions, we're always trying to give a callback for our students. Pens are a big deal. Of course, everybody likes a little candy. It's like, woo, they won the lottery or something, but freebies are good and it also breaks up the monotony. Next slide, please. And speaking of breaking up that monotony, it's really important that you break from yourself now and again to give a little video or a little song clip, so it's not just you yapping at them all the time. So I always choose 30 to 60-second videos to incorporate through my presentations, and it just brings people back from the dead, and it gives me a break so that I can go and take a little water. Perfecto, yes? Okay, next slide. So of course, energy, this is the big deal. And again, if you are going to give a presentation or a lesson, it's because you are the subject matter expert. And I'll tell you what, I taught for 30 years, and there were many years and many times that I really had to struggle to get the energy to go up into a classroom. But you have to remember, you have customers there, you have people there, you have clients there, right? They deserve your energy. So even if you're having the worst day, month, or year around, you really have to rev yourself up and give them what they paid for or give them what they came for, right? So make it worth their time by giving them some energy. Now, not every presentation you make is going to be happy, right? But you then are going to replace that with some intensity, right? So whatever form of energy you are wrestling up, just make sure that it's enough so that we don't go back to being the Ferris Bueller's Day Off teacher. Okay, next slide. All right, so we went through the tips and tricks, and now there's an elephant in the room. What haven't we mentioned? I'm giving you all these things, and you might be thinking, yeah, J-Lou, like that's gonna work, or that might work for you, but that won't work for me. So I'm just wondering, what's the elephant in the room? What haven't I mentioned? So if you could now throw in the chat box, what do you think the elephant in the room is so far? What haven't I mentioned? Let's take about 10, 15 seconds and see if we can get anything in the chat. Good, Sheila. Any other guesses? Sheila brings up a really good point, and what I would say is it doesn't matter what the topic is because there's no such thing as a boring topic. If you're doing everything that I'm suggesting, your topic won't be boring, okay? You're the one that brings it to life. So any topic can be good as long as you're putting all of these strategies to life. So Let's see. Larry says audience interaction. Yep. Okay. So we have talked a little bit about that, and we might wonder, how can we further do that? We're doing it right now. Jennifer says relevant, interesting information. Absolutely. If it's not relevant and interesting, one of two things, Jennifer, right? We have to go find relevant, interesting information, or we as the speaker have to make whatever content we have relevant and interesting, right? By the stories that we tell and the pictures that we show and so on. So Brian says relating to the audience, absolutely. We certainly need to do that. And again, that's why today I would wear those goofy blue shoes, because I know I'm speaking to an audience of 110th graders, yes? So that's very important. I believe that the biggest elephant in the room with presenting, however, is, Dan, next slide. And Deanna had me, okay? The look of the PowerPoint, very good. So for my presentation today, I'll be reading the PowerPoint slides word for word. Wah, wah. Unfortunately, everybody, the elephant in the room, since the dawn of slideshows, we've used them and abused them, and we need to stop that now. There's nothing wrong with using slides as the visual to your presentation, but we can't overuse them, and we must use them correctly, okay? And most of us have used them incorrectly in the past. So Dan, if we could go to that next slide, please. This is a little video, and we're gonna just watch the first 2 minutes. And as you watch this comedian making fun of PowerPoint users, I want you in the back of your mind to be thinking, have you seen a slideshow like this before, or have you yourself created one that looks like this before? And let's just look at this, and I'll tell you when to stop, please.
That there's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Dan. Okay, so by a show of hands in the chat, or just say yes if you've ever broken any of those. Just a yes or a high five or whatever you got for me. I'm right. Okay, Dan, if you could go to the next slide for me, please. So here's the scoop, everyone. We should be seeing lots of yeses over in that chat box, just because PowerPoint is, like I said, overused and abused. There's no better way to caution. So the slide in front of you here comes directly from a website, Gar Reynolds, and it does indeed have 3 R's. So jot that down, garreynolds.com. And this is a professional speaker, and he's got an entire section on his website dedicated to slides. And what he'll show you is those top 2 slides are like the types of slides most people make and use when they present. And they're, of course, way too word heavy. And what he wants to encourage people to do is get your slides looking like the slides on the bottom 2 there. Okay, and so it's because of this and slideshows from Steve Jobs with Apple that I have designed my slides to be pictorial in nature for the last 10 to 15 years. And I would say that if you have lots of specific information to give and lots of points to give, that instead of giving those on a slide, make sure to do that in a handout fashion. That way the audience can see it up close, make markings on it, take it with them, right? So if you have that many words, do not muck it up with a slideshow, right? Give it as a handout, and then you can put the most important statistics on the slide that you're referencing, and then you can use the handout to guide the rest of your conversation if you have lots of projections of numbers and data and statistics and analysis, okay? But don't throw it all up on a slideshow, okay? Especially not one that has 50 different slides, right? Okay, thanks, Dan. All right, so the room was PowerPoint or slideshows, however you want to go about it. I've told you the tips and tricks that I use not only in my classroom, but then I bridge it over to my corporate training sessions. And I just wanted to end today by telling you some things that really irritate me when I go and listen to other speakers. And so this is my don't list, just to kind of end with don't do this. If you learn anything today, don't say and as much as you. A hard one. What we can do instead is simply pause, because you'll never hear a 1 second pause, but you'll always hear a 1 second So I just had a 1 second pause. I said, you'll never hear a 1 second pause. You'll always hear an So if I said, if you'll never hear a second pause, you're hearing the right? I'm singing the That makes you sound less professional, and studies will report that it also makes you look less intelligent. Okay, so practice not saying or and when you are bothered by other speakers doing that, realize that you too might. So record yourself the next time you speak. You've got your cell phone with you all the time. Just put it on record, go back and listen later. Challenge yourself to eliminate those and ahs. Okay, the next don't is don't use lingo that makes you sound too lofty or trendy, right? Like, oh, we're gonna take this offline, or oh, let's circle back to this. You know what the lingo is, right? And it just sounds really dopey because it's overused. So I would say choose your own fresh words as you go out into your presentations. The next thing I would say, don't read your slides and don't read your notes. You should know this information well enough that you don't need any notes when you get up there. Okay, if you have a little bullet pointed outline, that's cool, but don't bury your head in it, right? Look at your audience. That's where you're creating the rapport and the connection. Okay, next, don't go over time. Okay, there can be nothing more insulting than saying, oh, I know we only have till the top of the hour, but, oh, and top of the hour, by the way, is another one of those lingos, right? So don't go over time. People don't have the time for you to be doing that. Speaking of which, it's 12:27. I think we're all right. Okay, good. Also, don't apologize. If something goes wrong, say, excuse me, but don't apologize and weaken yourself during the talk. Next, don't fidget or pace, because then that is going to alert people that you are a train wreck. You might be a train wreck when you're up there. Chances are you will be. 99% of people don't like giving public talks, okay? But you've got to fake it till you make it or become it, right? So try not to fidget or pace. You've heard of power posing. If not, look it up. Try to power pose before you go into a situation. Try breathing deeply, try imagining yourself as a superstar. You know all the tricks, you can do them, but more than anything else, you just have to believe you can get up there and that you have value, and then use all of the tricks that I taught, because those too will give you tons of confidence. If you've got props and activities and plans for your audience, there's absolutely no way you're going to be pacing around aimlessly, because you've planned stuff to do. Okay, and then finally, don't ever let them see you sweat. So what I can't stand is when speakers come into a room, they're all like, oh, because they didn't come and test the technology before, and they're like, oh, is this gonna work? Or, oh, sorry about that, or, oh, I got here late. Like, we don't care. Be a professional, right? So get there early, figure your stuff out early, make sure that it's all working. If you drop a piece of paper, pick it up like a pro. Don't freak out, right? People are sick of seeing presenters crumble. If you're crumbling, we feel awkward. Right? That's a bad situation. So that's my don't list. I gave you my do list in terms of how you can decorate your presentations to be much more engaging for your audience. Told you about the elephant in the room and how to simplify your slides. And this is my don't list. So now it's time for some questions and answers. If I could, I'd give you some popcorn to go along with this. But what do you have for me? Pop some questions my way.
For you. I've got my prop.
Yes. Hey, everybody, check this out. When I drink out of this mug, check it out.
Oh, look at you.
How cool is that, right? Branding. My student workers made that for me.
Well, here's one to start you off, Jaylu. Your best public speaking experience and your worst public speaking experience.
Ooh. My worst public speaking experience was when I was presenting for Ford Motor Company. I had about 45 executives that I was working with for whatever reason that day. I thought it would be a good idea to put my notes on a clipboard, and I'm a highly excitable personality, and somebody asked me a question and I said, good question, and when I did that, it was an old style clipboard with the metal on top, and I got so excited that I slashed myself in the face, and from my lip to my cheek I was gashed. And so I had to call a blood break. I had to go back into the restroom and try to patch myself up, and then go back out and compose myself as best I could with looking like I'd been in a fight, not a presentation. So that's one of my worst memories, though I could cite many embarrassing moments like that that have happened to me as a speaker. But guess what? At the end of the day, we are not superhuman. We are human. So you excuse yourself, you laugh about it, and then you move on. And everyone needs to learn from that. The more awkward that you react, the more the audience will hold you liable, right? But if you act like, it's all right, because we're all human. Nobody expects you to be superhuman. Let's see, one of my best speaking experiences, well, one of the biggest honors of my life was to go back and be a commencement speaker at my alma mater of Midland High. I graduated from Midland High in Midland, Michigan in 1988 and started my teaching career in Indiana, but came back and taught for 5 years at Midland High. And when I was there, what they would do is nominate certain teachers to be commencement speaker. And so I was asked to be a commencement speaker, and it was a really special night for me because my cousin was actually graduating, and my grandparents, who were still alive at the time, were there to see my cousin graduate, but also got to see my commencement address to about 3,000 people in the Midland High gym. And it was a message that I thought was really powerful, and I asked people as they went out into their adult lives to volunteer and to vote. And so the symbol was V. I had them involved, read them a little part of the Lorax, which is a children's story, to kind of prove the point. And it worked together really well, but then just personally, it was a nice experience for me to be back in that gym in a different capacity with both my grandparents and my parents and my aunt and uncle there. And you don't get experiences like that very often. And what I would say to all of you is that when you do get the invitation, take the invitation, right? If you're at a funeral and they're saying, do you want to get up and say a few words? Take that opportunity to honor people by your words. You don't have to be perfect, right? Just seize the opportunity, and it will grow you and grow those around everybody richer. So that's what I would say about that. Thanks, Dan.
All right, we do have some additional questions now.
Okay.
First, do you ever get any complaints that there's too much fluff, not enough meat in your presentations?
Yeah, for sure. And that is a really good question, because I was presenting for Spicer Engineering over in Saginaw a couple years ago, and they're all civil engineers. And so I was really working with them when they go out into a normal setting and talking to lay persons, how to explain engineering concepts and plans for building and so on, so that we can understand it, right? And they were showing me the slides that they create, and it was just Greek. And I was explaining to them that, hey, you need to dumb this down a little bit to the point where I'm going to understand it. And so we started to clean out a lot of the clutter, and that was their comment, hey, is this too much fluff? And I always said, there are serious talks that you go into. It can't all be fluff, but can we add a funny picture? Can we add a funny comment? Can we add an audience question or a brainstorming session just to kind of break the monotony? Yeah, you don't have to be all fun and games. And what I tell people is not everyone's like me. You're not going to have the God-given energy that I have. Maybe you will, but most people don't. And that's a gift that I can capitalize on, but you can capitalize on your gifts. And you can still use those strategies to break up your serious talks, but they don't have to become fun and entertainment. Does that make sense?
Awesome, totally. Thank you. All right, the best way to practice presentations.
Best way to practice presentations is just to know your information from beginning to end, and know that if it comes out differently than you rehearsed or you planned, that's okay, because no one knows what you rehearsed or you planned, right? And a lot of people go completely off script or completely off outline when they're up here just because they get a huge brain fart and they get done and they say, I don't know what I said. Well, it sounded pretty good. We have no idea what you have to remember, plan as best as you can, try to stick to that plan, but if you don't, who's gonna know, right? So don't let that freak you out and derail you.
How about if you're attempting to use humor, nobody laughs? You acknowledge the flop, make light of it, or just power through?
Yeah, I always say something to the effect of, well, luckily I'm the funniest person I know. But I can pull that off just because I'm a bit of a nut. Sometimes if it's a total bomb, I'll be like, well, that bombed, and then I'll go on. And so you can call attention to it. I believe that calling attention to the elephant in the room is always the best policy for me. But again, I've been directing traffic in a classroom for 30 years, so that's a little bit easier for me just because of my comfort level. And if somebody doesn't laugh at your joke, well, maybe they didn't realize it was a joke, and you can simply go on to your next point.
Thank you. That was from Jake Rietma. Thanks, Jake.
Oh, that's funny, because I think that everything Jake says is funny, so how would nobody, I don't know how that would happen.
He's trying to help others out. Brittany is asking, with the hybrid of work from home and some people being in person and others online during presentations, do you have any specific tips for those types of presentations?
I would say, Brittany, all the exact same tips, right? Because when you're online, you have to do even more to break it up. And I was a little leery today about showing those video clips because I didn't know exactly if technology was going to work. But Dan made it work for us, and I think that was nice. And y'all like to see a little bit something different than me, just to jumpstart our conversation and then to reinforce with humor the whole PowerPoint issue. And so I think that the more we can add in the interaction, the better. And you notice that I've really been asking you questions along the way and then giving you that pause to type your answers into the message box. If you're going to ask people to participate in a hybrid situation, you then need to give them the time, and then you need to have your comments box up and running so that you can see what's going on there too, so you can always be aware, call people by name if possible. And so I think just as important in a hybrid situation to vary it.
Thank you. Sheila is asking if you have ever tried to create the super slide like Edward Tuft, I think. It looks very time consuming after I attended one of his book presentations. Are you familiar with that?
Sheila, I do not know who Edward Tuft is, but I'll look him up and respond to you because there are 3 other slide trends right now, and I'm wondering if his falls under that. So let me look it up and get back with you. But basically on slides, my slides anyway, they look exactly like they did today, and that's, imagery only.
Yeah, Sheila, we can get back to you on that one. Thank you. Last question for the day is, Brian is wondering, what are some of the most requested topics or subject areas that you present at conferences?
Oh, sure. So I'm all soft skills. So when I taught at Northwood, it was business communications. And so now out in training and development world, my most requested is presentations, and it's presentations for critical information. So how to make those engaging, even though it's critical and hard information to hear. And I think that sort of relates back to that other question about too much fluff. So that's my most popularly requested topic. I get a lot of requested presentations on email etiquette and business writing, because so many people are writing in messaging standards now, right? Text messaging standards. So I go in and remind people of how to write in business communication standard flush left and writing out the word YOU instead of making it a letter. And the new generation is coming in thinking that YOU isn't a thing, it's just the letter U. And so, just lots of reminders, or perhaps teaching these things for the first time. And I also get a lot of team building requests for workshops, and lots of using impromptu presenting and improvisational acting to come in and team build with your audience, but also that is a skill that helps to cultivate business communication. So those are some of my more popular topics.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, taking time out of your busy day. I think you mentioned earlier you just led a group of students, 100 students on campus for a tour. Thank you for quickly doing that and then joining us today. And thanks to all of you online for joining us. We do this monthly, so watch your email for the next topic in May. And again, thank you. Go Timberwolves, and enjoy the rest of your day.